Hi, I'm Andy Miller. I'm going to be presenting a video abstract on the study from Webb and colleagues titled Predicting High Flow Nasal Cannula Therapy Outcomes Using the ROX Heart Rate Index in the Pediatric ICU. Yeah, a little background. So high flow nasal cannula is used widely in pediatric critical care and outside the ICU at a lot of institutions. It's been associated with reduced need for intubation and treatment escalation, largely in bronchiolitis, but it's used in a number of other patient populations as well. But we don't have really good evidence on what predicts failure and what predicts the need for intubation. So in our adult colleagues, they use the ROX index, which is a fairly simple scale that has been shown to have a pretty good sensitivity and specificity for treatment failure. But this doesn't apply to children because children have higher respiratory rates at baseline, and then the respiratory rate also varies with age. As kids get younger, their baseline respiratory rates are higher. So how they did their study, so they did a retrospective observational cohort study. They included all the kids who received high flow nasal cannula that were less than 2 years old. They excluded those with home oxygen therapy, relative contraindications to NIV, limitations of care, such as a DNR order. Then they calculated both the ROX and the ROX heart rate index every 2 hours for the first 12 hours, and then at 18, 24, and 48 hours after high flow nasal cannula initiation. Then the primary purpose of their study was to evaluate the ROX heart rate's ability to predict NIV failure, and this is just an example of how the ROX index is calculated. So it's SpO2 over FiO2 times frequency, and then you can see here the ROX heart rate index is SpO2 times 100 divided by the FiO2 times the frequency times the heart rate. So still fairly simple, a little bit more complicated than the ROX index, but also fairly simple to apply at the bedside. On to the results. So they had 446 encounters. Most of these were initial support, so 68%. The other 32% were post-extubation. Over 3/4 had bronchiolitis, and then the high flow nasal cannula failure rate was 25%. Then of those, 63% ultimately required intubation. Then they observed that higher flow and higher FiO2 were observed in those who failed high flow nasal cannula. And then the ROX index predicted failure at 1, 2, 6, 8, and 10 hours post high flow nasal cannula initiation. And they found that a cutoff of around 3 was associated with the risk of failure at 1 and 6 hours. So here are the area under the curve graphs charting sensitivity and specificity, and you can see here this is at 1 hour on the top, this is 6 hours on the bottom, and you can see here that the sensitivity goes up quite a bit and the specificity goes down over time at both 1 and 6 hours. Little discussion. So the ROX heart rate index improved upon the ROX for children. It appears to be a useful tool, but again, it's going to require additional validation. We need to study from another center, different patient populations, including some older children, maybe a little more broad beyond just a cohort largely made up of bronchiolitis. Limitations, no study is complete without some limitations, so it's a single center study. They didn't protocolize high flow nasal cannula use. They didn't specifically define failure, which is impossible in a retrospective cohort study, but is important for clinical trials. And then the ideal cutoff is a balance between sensitivity, which predicts failure, and specificity, which predicts success. And we don't know what exactly the perfect cutoff is going to be for the ROX heart rate index. In conclusion, the ROX heart rate index predicted high flow nasal cannula failure, and it appears to be a useful tool in children less than 2 years old. And thanks for listening. Please subscribe to our YouTube channel, check us out on Twitter, and follow us on Facebook, and email me with any questions. Thank you.